Hello Grinderschool, this is CodeRed Rules, and right now I'm going to be replaying some hands from our last Grinderschool Cash Series. It was about a week ago. This is event number 3, and it's a 6 max event at full tilt, as you guys can see. And I pulled out about 19 hands. I should be able to get through them all and talk about them all okay. They're kind of spread out between different tables and stuff, so I really don't know what order these are in, so we should just get started. Right off the bat, you guys are going to notice that I'm doing 6 max content, and this is probably the first 6 max content that I've done for Grinderschool. It's kind of odd that it's worked out that way. I do 6 max coaching. In fact, I think one of my students was even playing in some of this. And just right off the bat, big difference between like 6 max and full ring. A lot of it is just pre-flop play. And then realizing that the post-flop ranges are going to be wider. So, my insight here should be a little bit different than maybe what you're used to in terms of 6 max. And it might be on the nittier side, but let's go ahead and get started here. First hand, I expect Mr. Chevy Celeb is going to be raising, and then Jeffrey. The standard play for me would be to call. He makes the re-raise, and I actually don't mind the re-raise here. Mr. Chevy Celeb was running like I think 26, 23 at the time. Whether or not to re-raise here for value is solely dependent on how often Mr. Chevy Celeb is going to call the re-raise. I personally believe Chevy's going to have a real hard time folding like 7s plus here, as well as like ace queen to the re-raise. Depending on how aggressive Jeffrey has been, I actually don't think Jeffrey was all that aggressive in this tournament. So I'm surprised, Chevy Celeb was going to call him a little bit wider, but like in the end, I think like this re-raise with 10s is defendable. And against someone who's going to be re-raising a wide range, ace queen offsuit isn't necessarily a horrible call pre-flop out of position. However, it's not necessarily one that you're going to be making a lot of money on, unless you have a read or history with Jeffrey that he's in 3-betting fairly aggressively. And if I know Jeffrey, he plays a very tight, nitty kind of game, especially pre-flop. So I might even fold the ace-queen here pre-flop to Jeffrey in his re-raise, because I don't really think Jeffrey's re-raising ace-jack. And so it's like kind of a polarized range Jeffrey's going to have, whether or not he's going to have like some kind of suit connector here, or if he's going to have ace-king, ace-queen, or even some kind of like medium strength to large strength over pair. So anyway, we have ace-queen. That's not really the biggest problem I have right now. It's actually what Jeffrey does on the flop here, and he continuation bets. This is a bet that really has no value to it at all. All right, Chevy's going to be folding like 6s and 7s now if he did call with them pre-flop because of the aces out there. But essentially what Jeffrey is doing by betting out in this flop is he's representing the ace with his top pair when he has like second pair. All right, he is turning his hand into a bluff right now. Mr. Chevy Celeb is not folding a better hand. If Chevy had like jacks or queens, he's certainly not folding for one bet post flop. So unless Jeffrey's willing to barrel, which inherently becomes spewier and spewier the less outs that we have, right? So unless Jeffrey's willing to barrel, there's really not a whole lot he can do like after this call. Chevy Celeb's like check calling range in this flop is probably like jacks, eights, 9s, jacks through aces, ace king, ace queen. All right. Of all those hand ranges, ace king, ace queen makes up roughly 12 combos each, 24 combinations. 8s, 9s, another 6. So therefore, the 30 combinations of like nut hands that will never fold. And then jacks, queens, and kings makes up roughly 18. So almost 2-to-1 ratio of hands he's never folding compared to hands that like Jeffrey would like to fold, and jacks, queens, and kings. So in that sense, like Jeffrey c-betting on here is not a plus EV c-bet at all. Even like Chevy Celeb isn't going to be folding a lot in this board anyway. So I do not like this bet, and Chevy Celeb is going to make the call. Not a good turn card for Jeffrey at all, and you guys check it down. So, I mean, post flop this hand played out fairly straightforward. I see this a lot by players turning kind of made hands into bluffs, and usually the reasoning I see for it is like, well, I don't want to give king queen a free card or something like that, and that's really only going to happen 12% of the time on the next street. And potentially, if he does have king queen, he might try and bluff you off as well. But in all reality, you just don't have any fold equity here that makes up any kind of like hand range that Chevy Celeb has. If you put like Ace Jack in Chevy's hand range, then it's even worse of a continuation. But so yeah, like we are going to flop an overpair with tens like half the time, if not more than half the time, which is why it's really hard of a hand for us to re-raise pre-flop. Especially if we're out of position. Right now we're in position, so it makes it a little bit easier. But the reason why we can re-raise a little bit wider in position is that we can take the free card and induce bluffs from our opponent and force him to play out of position. Whereas it's not really difficult for opponent to like play that hard out of position when he just check calling here. And in all reality, like when we do have tens, there aren't a whole lot of boards that we really like to see in a re-raise pot. Like if it's jacks through aces, right? We have second pair. We're not really wanting to build a big pot. And if it's like a 9-high board, like let's say it was a 9-high board here, if we get check called when we have tens, chances are we're going to be behind. Either he's got like a set, or he's going to have an overpair to us. There are very few hands he can check call us on the 9-high board when we have tens that we actually had on. So I don't really care for turning a made hand to a bluff in this situation. Okay, we'll go on to the next hand. And I believe, let's see what happens here. Colossus raises and JGB calls. Both of these plays are particularly standard. A lot of people would question why JGB is just calling here. He's in position, which allows him to call a much, much wider range than say he were out of position. If he were out of position here, I would say JGB would be re-raising quite a bit. This would probably be like the number one hand that I'd be re-raising if I'm out of position, and go from there. Otherwise, my problem is actually post-flop. And it's when Colossus decides to check here to induce a bluff or to slow play. And what you're going to see is a lot of hands I actually pulled out from Colossus' hand range. And I think he was maybe getting a little too much of the metagame, treating a little bit too much of the fancy play syndrome. But here's a situation where we're going to be continuation betting with like all kinds of garbage, right? We're going to be continuation betting with like king, queen high, jack high, 10 high, 5 high, 7 high. You know what I mean? Like this is a prototypical like C-bet for bluff kind of board. And we have actually the very top of our hand range comparatively versus bottom of our line, especially when we're raising like, probably 50-60% out of the blinds. H-Egg absolutely crushes this board and crushes whatever Jeffrey's going to be calling with. Jeffrey's going to be calling with like any flush draw, any 8, any pair, I'm assuming any pair higher than 8s. He might just be flooded with complete air. He might even just try and bluff raise this too. So like, C-betting this flop becomes very plus AV in terms for both balance and value. Like I said, Colossus checks, and Jeffrey actually does a pretty good check behind. He could value bet here too with his ace-9, but he's going for the pot control line, I'm assuming. So there's not a whole lot of cards that Jeffrey's not wanting to see on the next street. I don't really know of any cards that really Jeffrey's hating to see. So he can check it behind here. He knows he can't go for 3 streets. And if he gets check raised, it's going to look kind of gross. So Colossus bets half pot. Okay, I mean, there's really nothing wrong here. But what happens is like Colossus just ends up like value taunting himself by not betting this flop. Had he bet the flop, right, he would have been able to get an extra 3 of value in here. He c-bets the flop. He gets called. The 6 pairs on the board. He c-bets it again. Jeffrey has to call with his kicker being good. And then once the jack comes, like Colossus has the option whether or not to value bet here with his ace. And he at least has the option to put in another 3 to value and can give himself an extra like anywhere between 15 and 20 big blinds, which is going to be very imperative. And it all goes down to like checking the flop and why that's not really good on this board. It's, balance and value reasons. Especially with a hand like ace jack or blind versus blind, we can actually get 3 streets of value. The only value we're going to get by checking is when Jeffrey decides to bluff or when he has absolutely crushed. Okie dokie. The very next hand, or not really next hand, but the next hand I go over, Thang Luan raises. I have Thang Luan's hands, but he gives them to me in such a way where they're all combined in like one big file, and it makes it almost extremely difficult for me to get his hand history out. But I think I still have his hand at the end of the session. So, Colossus makes a call, and I think the call is just fine given. I think everyone's going to be opening up pretty wide in this table, so calling out of position when he's check suited. Excuse me. While calling out of position when he's check suited is marginal here, I think it's still I mean, it's debatable, but I think it's okay. The biggest problem that I have right now is just Colossus's like flop lead. Okay, we actually represent absolutely nothing as a bluff, and the problem is we can very not two barrel like any turn cards other than maybe a jack, or I guess an ace, but like that's only for value. There's really no two barrel cards on the turn that we can bluff competently, because what would we barrel on the turn that we decide to bet on the flop? So like, it doesn't really make too lot of sense what we're calling out of position here with and then leading out on this kind of board. If anything, this board actually hits Theng Luan's hand range and not our own, because Theng Luan's raising range is going to be wider than our calling range out of position is, and so our lead here is very weak. I mean, this is something that like if Phil probably knew you weren't an instructor, he probably would raise this up because he knows it's very weak. But I think, given the fact that like he knows you're an instructor, he's probably thinking like, well, I really can't raise him up here. But here's the thing: like, you can bluff raise situations where our inherent range is going to be a lot stronger than like their range. So it's very hard for Colossus to re-bluff us back when we try to put in a raise in a situation. When our raising situation here is going to be very easily defined as like hands that we're willing to take off with and hands that we're not willing to take off with. So like the hands that we're not willing to take off with would be like complete air, and the hands that we would be willing to take off with would be like combo draws and over pairs and two pairs and stuff. It's very hard for Colossus to have any kind of draw on this board. Maybe like the ace high flush draw, but then why would he be leading out when he could probably be check calling it profitably too? Not only wanting to get raised off his hand. So Colossus's floppy lead here is not very good at all. He ends up turning top pair, which, okay, I mean, I would think now that we're ahead, because I believe I'm putting Theng Luan in a hand range. I'm putting him on some kind of like pair of some kind, if not flush draw or something. Colossus declines to two barrel it out on one of the two boards. He can actually two barrel for value. So along these lines, it's kind of, if you could have a note on Colossus, it's like he leads flop a lot with air, but then when he hits his turn card, he's not two barreling it unless he has like over top pair, right? So this is a very exploitable line once Rob shows this down. So not something that we're looking for. He checks though to induce some bluffs from Theng Luan, I imagine, and so he check calls. And once Colossus hits his jack on the turn, he's no longer folding. And then Theng Luan makes two bet sizes here, seemingly for value. And I think Phil's bet sizing here. Okay, first off, I'm going to show you guys that Phil had a bluff. He had the open and straight draw. I like to say that I think Phil's bet sizing here is very good for the what he's trying to accomplish. Right, he's trying to get his opponent off some kind of marginal hand. If Colossus didn't have ace jack here, I would feel like Colossus would have a really hard time calling with ace 10 or queen 10, king 10, or even like queen jack or jack 9. Now then again, I'm not really sure of the dynamic that's been going on the table. Maybe like Theng Luan has been bluffing a lot, and maybe it's once he hits top pair here, it's a very easy check call down. But that said, Phil, like what I would say is, instead of calling the flop with complete air, I would bluff raise. All right, because what's going to happen is it's going to be cheaper for you to bluff the flop than to call the flop and then bet the turn when your opponent checks to you. All right, I say that because look what happens here, right? Colossus bets 40. We could essentially raise it to $1.20, costing us $1.20 total. We call here and bet $1 when checked to, costing us $1.40. So we could have saved 2 big blinds less by bluff raising the flop than calling the flop and betting the turn. Also, along the lines of that is, by calling the flop, we depend on our opponent to checking to us again on the next street. Okay, so we can raise the flop without having to depend on our opponent betting into us again, which makes it a much more play-savvy play than, in my opinion, than like floating the flop with just king high, because we really do have nothing but king high here. We've got 2 backdoor draws, right? We have a backdoor open straight draw, backdoor flush draw, 2 overcards. This is enough for us to raise it up, and there's enough 2 barreling cards in the next street that we can actually continue bluffing our opponent on, right? So we would bet like any jack, any ace probably, as well as any spade, we probably wouldn't be betting any queen or king, but we'd be checking that behind and then betting on the river. So raising the flop gives us a lot of two-barreling opportunities. Consequently, the Colossus has very little two-barreling opportunities when he leads this flop. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go on here. And let's see who's this up against. Colossus makes a loose raise here from the hijack, which is debatable. And He Machine didn't send me his hands. Quizit sent me his hands, just like filled it all in one massive jumble, and I haven't figured out how to get those in the rest of the hand histories yet. But we get to see Hayden's hand at the end of the session, I believe. Okay, if not, then there's a reason why I showed this hand. Right, so Colossus declines to c-bet on this board. And I think it's actually an okay spot to not c-bet. We might be having ace high, probably not though, but we're not going to get any pair like higher than 4s to fold. So like 4s, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 jacks, whatever. That's going to make up just a vast majority of He Machine's hand range. So I can see why Colossus is just cutting his losses right now. Okie dokie. And Colossus now decides to turn his ace high into a bluff. Probably, not a very good thing after checking the flop. The reason why I say this is, like, once we check the flop, it's very hard for us to have any kind of, like, super strong hand, including, like, a set. Or, the only thing that we could ever have here would be, like, the nut straight, 8-9 that we flop that we try to still play, which, again, probably wouldn't be very good just because of the fact that we want to build the pot. So, it's very hard for us to have anything here ever with whatever. So our opponent is going to be folding even less pairs, right? So if our opponent had twos or threes on this flop, I don't expect him to be folding now. We give our opponent another chance to hit a 10. It's very hard for us to have a 10 unless we have a hand like ace-10 in our hand range, and that's pretty much the only hand I'm representing. And even if we did have ace-10, like, our opponent could put a lot of pressure on us here and force us to fold ace-10. So I don't really even, I guess, we'd have to evaluate ace-10, right? But what I was going to get to here, it's a very plus EV opportunity for He Machine to bluff. Bluff raise anything. Like, I probably would bluff raise a hand like ace-jack here just to prevent Colossus from barreling. But if we had, like, pretty much any two cards in the situation, you could bluff raise Colossus. He made it a half pot size bet. He made it very cheap for us to make a bluff raise out there. We can make it 12 big blinds. And if we get 3-bet over the top, then, we risk 12 to win 11.5, which gives us very good odds to make a bluff. And it puts Colossus in a really tough situation because I think this, it's very hard for Colossus to have a strong range here, but it's very easy for us to be slow playing if we're He Machine, but checking behind the flop and trying to induce a bet on the next street. So, He Machine raised, and whether or not he had a bluff here or he didn't, we really don't know. But I just wanted to say that Colossus' delayed c-bet on this board isn't very good, especially given the weak range that we're representing on the flop. So, alright, let's go on to the next hand. Alright. This is, I think, Knockem Kid's first foray into the Grinderschool Cash Series. I don't think he's really been around for GTS either, so thanks for participating and thanks for getting me your hands. I'm sorry for being so harsh on you in advance. Alright, and I couldn't believe my eyes at this the first time I saw this either. I had to go back and check 2 or 3 times to see if, like, the hand history got screwed up or something like that. But under the gun player raises the 3x, and we re-raise in the small blind with pocket 7s. And it's kind of weird because I actually had a session with a student like a couple weeks ago who did the exact same thing, but in a flooring game, and I'm very confused at the reasoning why. I think maybe it's my fault for not being as clear in my How to Master video in terms of what hands turn into a bluff and so whether or not we can call it properly, turn into a re-raise and stuff. 7s is a very easy call here in my opinion, just because how strong it is. We don't have to be check folding 100% of flops. I probably would be check calling any flop that has that only has like one overcard, or if it's like Queen 9-8, something like that, or Queen 9-2. I probably would be check calling any board that doesn't like an ace or king on it. I might fold to that, or maybe it's just like one overcard I would check call. But we don't have to re-raise here and turn a hand into a bluff. In fact, what's going to happen is it's almost like the worst play you can make, in my opinion. Like, I'd almost rather see you fold pre-flop than make the re-raise here. First, you're bluffing or under the gun raiser. 2, your raise size is actually not very good at all. Like, if you're going to be bluffing here, you should be making $1.20. And you could just easily call here and show a profit rather than re-raise. And so re-raising here there's absolutely no reason to do it. Um, your opponent 4-bets you, and I don't really have a read on Profess player, but even if he was a complete monkey, like 60-30 kind of player, we would certainly not want to re-raise that guy pre-flop. And if we got to the point where he was so aggressive, like 100, there were like 10, 12 hands, and he was willing to go all in every hand, and we wanted to re-raise pre-flop with our 7s for value, then we would most certainly be going all in pre-flop with 7s. We can't call the 4-bet. It's for 27 blinds. 1, 2, we're out of position calling 4-bet, and 3, we have a hand like pocket 7s. So yeah, there's a lot of mistakes here. Mistake number 6 or 7 is when we decide to lead this flop on a king queen jack flop. Okay, this SPR at this point is like what, 1.5 to 1. Our opponent can stack off with us with pretty much any pair under the sun, right? Pocket aces is not going to fold here because he's got 6 outs against any set, and you know what I mean. And 6 outs is 6 outs, and that's 25% equity, giving him, with enough stack to spot ratio, he's going to be ahead often enough. Yeah, like we're not folding anybody here with anything unless a complete bluffer or something like that. Pocket 10s, even if he has pocket 10s, he's not folding here. He's got 10 outs or 9 outs, something like that, with the open end straight draw. So yeah, this flop lead here does absolutely nothing, and you're just kind of wasting 19 big blinds. And he shoves all in, which is kind of expected because somebody's 4-bet range is usually like jacks are better and ace king for value, and along those lines. So sorry, Knockem Kid, for being so harsh on you with your first hand, but hopefully in the future you get the many mistakes that were made in this hand and not make them in the future. Okie dokie, on to the next hand. We have pocket 8s here in the big blind, and I think I remember this. Big Dippin' and Tundruk were both fish at the table, I believe, because you can see open limp and this guy isolates. And JGB is in the big blind with his pocket 8s. Very standard call, in my opinion. Set mining, no big deal. Tundruk c-bets out $1, and JGB calls, which is extremely standard. And Big Dippin' comes in and makes a very large raise in position. Again, I don't really have a read on Big Dippin', but let's just say versus an unknown, like very classic, very easy fold here. He makes it 5x. It's very clear that he has a very strong hand. A lot of times you see bluffs in this scenario, they're going to be very weak. Okay, JGB decides to come over the top and go all in here. I don't know what kind of read that he has, but 150 big blinds deep, getting it in with second pair post flop is not a very good play. Even against the most wildest aggressive players post flop, I would find a fold here with my 8s. And I hate using the term find a better spot, but I mean we're out of position. He's showing a lot of strength, and he's got to be one aggressive guy here that we willing to go all in with second pair. Maybe you feel like he's representing two sides of a range, right? But keep in mind this is 10 and L, and they're not thinking that much, and you're not even playing against aggressive member at this point. And I believe I probably shouldn't even have included this hand because Knockem Kid is sitting out, but I had a hard time not talking about this given how deep we are, and I know this had to have been early in the session just because Knockem Kid was sitting out. Knockem Kid was only sitting out in like the first probably 20 hands or so. This makes it a very bad play by Jeffrey. And as you can see, he's up against the set, and you guys are going to be pissed off because he banks off a river 8, which is only going to influence his win rate at the for the game. But yeah, not a very good play at all on the flop. Live Life, it gets the aces, gets re-raised. Live Life 4 bets, a very small amount, 21 big blinds. Understandable though. So far, Live Life is playing just fine. I have a problem right now though with He Machine's 5-bet. All right, we're 5-betting the 42 big blinds, and okay, I have no problem with this as long as you're, getting it all in, right? Like this seems like wrapping up to a very classic aces versus kings moment. And what happens is Live Life jams it in, and He Machine makes a sick fold, getting there's 14 in the pot, getting 2.5 to 1 in his money. there's no reason at all that he machine should be putting in this much money in pre-flop and then folding. 5-bet bluffing, first off, not very good at this stake. Secondly, I mean, you really, or I'm sorry, 5-bet bluffing shouldn't really be done at all at these stakes. And I mean, you don't even have to do this at like 50 or 100. Well, and keep in mind that the quality of players that you're playing against does not match that level either. So like, you don't have to be 5-bet bluffing, and you put so much money in the pot right now that you have to be getting it in. I don't want it, like, if we have queens here, and the sole reason for 5-betting is to fold to a 6-bet all-in because it's, I mean, then we know we're ahead. That's not how we should be playing it, certainly at all. Right. So, yeah, not a very good play there by Heat Machine. Okie dokie. Knock'em Kid, second hand that you're playing that I'm reviewing, no open limping in 6-max, certainly. I mean, full ring is bad enough, but it's like absolutely atrocious in 6-max to open limp in any position. So yeah, not a very good open limp. You get isolated here, and you decide to call out of position again. I mean, we're just not going to be able to flop enough of a strong hand. Also, make sure you add on. You top up. You started this hand with $9. Make sure you always play with 100 big blinds. No need to like get lower. So if there's a full tilt, both PokerStars and Full Tilt have auto rebuy features. Even Absolute Poker now has auto rebuy features. So there should be no reason why you don't auto rebuy up to the full amount every time, unless you randomly play with $9, which doesn't really make any sense either. So okay. So I would fold pre-flop, and then fold again after being isolated. But we call, and just like the last time, we decided to lead into this flop 3 opponents, just kind of with complete air. 2 backdoor draws, just kind of like throwing a Hail Mary pass here. Maybe we get them to fold. Yeah, these kind of like bets are not very good. They do not work very often at all. I don't even know. This might have worked this hand. No, it didn't. Okay. This kind of like Hail Mary bet just doesn't work. And you, especially being like the first person to act against 2 people that have in the pot, like someone who isolated you, likely to hit a king or a jack here, and it's just not going to fold to 1 bet. So you got to be willing to barrel, and you just don't really have any good 2 barreling cards. Like I guess you can barrel a diamond or a 6. Not a whole lot of cards, and you have to expect that you're going to get called even by those hands. So, and I see this a lot by like players like betting the flop with complete air. It's okay if you're in position, right, and they check around to you like they've given up at that point. Then you can fire a barrel and fire a bet and get some fold equity. But just randomly leading here is not very good play. We get called, we check, he checks, we bet full pot, which is probably the best play that you've made that I've seen so far. It's just you overbetting this river when you hit your 5, knowing that you'll probably be behind. Okay, maybe your bet size needs a little bit of work here. A $3 bet probably would have worked just the same as a $3.85 bet, and returning a made hand to a bluff. But I mean, you have to realize that all of this happened because you set it a limp call 5-4 suited out of position pre-flop, which, I mean, just is a losing play in and of itself. So I mean, you could have been saving so much hassle and fancy play and stuff like that. This is not how you can or are able to beat like 10 NL 6 max, and there's no reason why at all you should be making this play, even at like any limits at 6 max. Not be making these plays. Okay. Okie dokie, and that seat, and okay, so it looks like we still have notes of Grinderschool regs here, which is just fine. Quizit and Mr. Chevy Celeb are both regulars. They're both form regulars. Trevor is a student of mine at 6 max, and I know he's opening up a very wide range on the small blind. And if either of you guys are running a HUD, like you guys both know that each of you guys are like a 26, 23 or something like that. You guys are both very aggressive. And when you're playing against aggressive players, then like you've got to be re-raising your hands for value, even with kings and aces. I'm sure you were like mixing it up here and you're slow playing. And I looked at like Quizit's fold to 3-bet stats, and they were very high. Like, I think he folded 2 out of 3 times. But especially just being in position like this with the kings, I mean, this is a situation where you're going to get played back at so lightly so often that we're like almost in a dream scenario. It'd be different if Quizit was like it was a big nit and was just going to fold to re-raise like every time. I've got a feeling though that like we're gonna like okay, well, let's just go through it how he plays the flop. All right, wet flop. I mean, it doesn't really hit a whole lot of anything. Chevy Slab makes a very nice raise. In fact, like it's one of those raises where it's just like, what in the world could you have here? Like whatever, you're bluffing me. And so like I expect Quizit to call with like any pair here, any diamond draw, like any 8. But outside of the flop, okay, Quizit is not going to be putting in a lot of money after the flop comes in. So like when the pot gets bigger, I mean Chevy Slub has to know that the number of hands going to pay him off post flop becomes much weaker, as compared to had he raised pre-flop, re-raised pre-flop, then the number of hands going to pay him off wider post flop actually increases, because the pot's so much harder and they're willing to put more money in post flop when they put so much money in pre-flop. Okie dokie. So we call here. We set up stacks very nicely with the kings, and we have to think we're ahead at this point. On a flush draw board, Trevor cannot be slow playing 2 streets with any kind of like set or anything. He's getting it all in here on the turn, given the stack sizes and stuff. The river brings in the flush, and you have to really assume that Quizit doesn't even have the flush draw here, because you're giving him 2.2 to 1 odds. He's only got like 2.2 to 1 odds behind it. I mean, it's not a very plus EV play for him to be drawing to a flush draw, so you have to assume that he doesn't have a flush draw here in such a raised pot. So, like, of all cards that come, yeah, the 2 diamonds is a scary card, but given the fact that it's very hard for Quizit to have a flush draw by check calling 2 streets, for him to checking this river when the flush draw comes in, whereas most everybody that I know is going to be shoving this river just because the pot's so large, and it's very easy for him to be bluffing or trying to represent a bluff of some kind or something like that. So, given like the amount of money's in the pot, it's just a very easy like value shove for us with the kings. All right, I understand the reason why you didn't still play the why you still play pre-flop, and you made up for it by raising the flop. Had you like re-raised pre-flop, the pot would have been 240. The pot would be so much larger getting into the turn. You'd probably be able to get it in by the turn. Okie dokie, if not getting it all in pre-flop. You made up for it, but getting an extra trade of value in there is no big deal. But I think you missed a lot of value here, especially when Trevor wakes up with pan like pocket queens, and you're probably kicking yourself because queens is going to be getting it all in pre most nearly every time, or getting it all in on this flop nearly every time. So yeah, we missed some value there for sure. Keep in mind that like Quizit also is going to have like 10s and jacks in his hand range, and queens, as well as like any 8 here going to the river. Yeah, he might not call the river with any 8, but like it's about the number of hands that call you compared to the number of hands that will beat you, that call, right? Or call you that you beat compared to the hands that you beat, that beat you that call. So, like, the number of hands that beat you that call here are very tiny, like maybe like pocket 9s or some kind of like flush that gets there. Compared to all the hands that you beat, like queen's going to call you, jacks probably will call you, all along those lines. So, we're looking at, I think, a very standard value bet on the river. Alright, next hand. And what happens here? Quizit opens it up again. We don't have his hand range till the very end. And that seat, which I believe is Amber Sheep on Grinderschool, makes the call. Very loose call, actually, in my opinion, given Quizit's opening range in the early position. I think ace and offsuit's like too weak. It's actually an okay spot for us to be bluffing here, but we can't really be doing too much for value in terms of calling and stuff. You can make an argument that calling with a suited ace and suited rather would be a more plus EV play than calling with ace and offsuit. But ace and offsuit would be very marginal call, given that we're out of position. I think you're not taking into effect out position all that much. We do call and we flop the nuts. All right. Right now, our goal should be solely to get the money all in as quickly as we can. All right. So we check. He c-bets. We check raise, and I really like this check raise. It's very hard for us to hit this board at all. I mean, it looks so bluffy. I probably would have made it less than $1.70, just to maybe like $1.40 or so. We don't need to be building stacks that much, and the biggest bet is going to determine like how much we decide to bet on the turn. All right, but you check raise here, and we're going to be called by like any 9 probably, or any like pair of jacks or better, maybe even like queen jack. So. I do like the check raise. Right now, Alright, we just have to bet large enough that we can get it all in on the next street. Okie doke. That's roughly $2, I guess I would say. And that way, therefore, we can jam the river for 6. Anything higher than that, means can make a small river bet jam. We check here, and the reason why I don't like the check, well, alright, I only like the check if you decide to check call it and not go for a check raise again. Which is what you did. I think going for a double check raise, yes, seems like it's fancy. Yeah, you might feel cool by doing it, but like, you're turning your hand extremely face up. And if I'm Quizit, I could fold anything here but like the boat, because you're check raising 2 streets with bluffing is probably nil. I mean, very very tiny, if any at all. So like, unless Quizit has like, I would say King 10. Maybe Queen 10 or better in the situation, right? The problem with Jack 10, if Quizit has Jack 10, is that Jack 10 loses to Queen 10, King 10, Ace 10. It loses to 10 9 and 10 6. Jack 10 only beats 10 8 and 10 7, right? And can you really put those hands in his hand range? I mean, it's very hard to put 10 8, 10 7 in his hand range. So there are, what do you call it? Ace, King, Queen, 9, 6. So five combinations of 10s that beat Jack 10, and only 2 that you beat. And I know we're getting pot odds are roughly 2.5 to 1. Let me go ahead and do stove real quick, and we'll see if this is a call. All right, so I ran the stove here. I mean, as you can see, we're at 26.5% with Jack 10 offsuit. I don't think it matters too much with whether we have Jack 10 suited. It might reduce some of his hands. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. We need 29%, so this is a fold, although it's like very close to a folder. It's like 1 or 2% away from being a break-even call. But I know because you have to include 9s in the hand range as well for the boat, which we didn't do in the first point. So yeah, if we're Trevor here, we have to pretty much fold like everything. Or other than like, unless we have like Queen 10 or like that. I guess we can do the numbers here if we have. What if we have Queen 10 suited? Yeah, so like a Queen 10 becomes a call, Jack 10 becomes a fold, almost clearly. And I didn't even put Jack 6 into Sheep's hand range, right? So I didn't even put 10-6 suited in there. So yeah, we are not in very good shape here. I probably would fold Jack 10 and kill myself doing so, and anything better than that. So I don't really care for the double check raise. On the other hand, had we decided to check call this turn, and then maybe like jam the river, we could have done that. We could have just bet like 250 on this turn and then jam the river, and trying to continue representing a bluff. So even though that when you do check raise here, we very rarely, if ever, have a bluff, like ever, I guess. Okay. And I have foresight that Quizit did have Jack 10 suited, but keep in mind that Jack 10 suited is like the very borderline, probably would be a fold. If we had Queen 10 suited, it probably would be a call. So, there we go. Okie dokie, on to the next hand. We've only got about, 7 or 8 left. CM Steph here could raise if he wants to, but I think goes around to Sheep and he opens. No, I'm sorry, he open limps the button, which probably is the number one reason why I've told his guys, no open limping. In 6 max, especially on the button. Even more, especially with a hand like 9-8 suited. I mean, we play so well in position that we should just be raising it up and be happy to do so. Alright. Trevor min bets and we decide to bluff raise him. Alright, I mean, I have generally no problem with bluff raising when it's cheap. It's a good way to learn how to look at situations where you can bluff raise, and as you slowly get better, you're going to find better and better spots, and the best spots to start are to do it when in cheap situations. Keep in mind that, though, you're representing absolutely nothing. I mean, nothing at all you can have here. It's very unlikely that you would actually even open limp a 4. So, I don't really give your bluff too much credit. It is a paired board, and I believe the Yeti theorem states, anybody who puts a raise in on a paired board is bluffing. So, Trevor, I know that was only coming over the top of the nuts as well, so we could go ahead and very easily fold our 9-8 suited. But a lot of problems there. Biggest one would be just the open limp pre-flop. Alright, next hand. Live Life makes a very loose raise again from the cutoff. Not a big deal. Gets cold called, and we flop the ace. We check call. Good. Good. I don't know what my problem is with this hand. Oh, okay. The problem is Quizit not re-raising ace king pre-flop, and that's really it. There's nothing else wrong with it. I think Quizit should be re-raising ace king. We're in position. Live Life is obviously opening up a wide range here because he has ace six, and go from there. I think Quizit made a good job not c-betting or not value betting the river. Had the board paired, we'd have to value bet it. I think it'd be imperative that we value bet it with ace king. Okie doke. We raise threes on the button. Thing Luan raises, and we call. All right. Very loose call with the threes. I'm not in love with it at all. I mean, it's very hard for us to flop set getting really set odds. Against Phil, even against Phil's like wide raising range, threes is very difficult to play post flop. And let's see what happens here. All right, Phil bets out. We call. Not a bad move given how we played so far. It's unlikely that we were beat to like sixes through nines or tens, something like that. So, I mean, more often than not, Thing Luan's going to have like missed overcards here, which is why we can call it on the flop. Phil checks here, and Phil's check means like one of two things. He's either going to be check calling his value hands, or he's going to be check folding his complete air. All right. Which is the reason why, or he could be check raising the nuts too, right? So, which is the reason why I hate CM stuff as a bet here, because first off, Phil doesn't have like 8, 9, or 10 in his hand range that you're gonna be bluffing out anyway. 2, like he's just inducing you to bet out with his marginal hands here, which is why he's checking. 3, if he has missed overcards, he's just gonna be folding them anyway. So your bet here has no value, all right? And so it becomes a very bad bet, and as we can see, like Phil shows up with pocket queens and plays his hand very well, and ended up taking an extra bet or two from CM stuff. We should have just like folded pre-flop. I do have to make a comment though. I believe Phil should have re-raised it to $1.20 pre rather than 90. Okie doke. So I guess given these price, CM stuff could have called it as cheap as it is. That's why if I'm Phil, gotta make it a little larger. Okie dokie, on to the next hand. That seat raises it up. Colossus calls in position, and we decide to c-bet it out. Again, this c-bet has absolutely no value to it. Alright, he's going to be folding 2s through 7s that we want to stay in. He's going to be calling us with any 9 or king. He's also going to be calling us with like overcards and a gut shot or something like that, which we're ahead of, but yet we get bluffed off so easily post flop or after this turn card that like we can't reasonably like bet this flop and then check call in another street. Just how like easily it is for him to value town us as well, that same line. So I don't like a bet here. What I would do is to check, hope to check it down. We can check call it once and go from there and see what the turn card brings us. On this turn card, I would check call again on the second street. I know what hand we're representing. It's very face up. We're actually representing a stronger hand than we have, but it might be enough that he might not two barrel into us. You know what I mean? Or even if or he won't like value bet us very thinly, but we don't really know that. We check, he bets when we fold, getting like 3.5 to 1, even though we got like an 8 high flush draw here to go with our hand. So yeah, I don't like the flop c-bet, and it really screws up the way. And I think like the whole mindless c-betting thing is just a very bad dynamic to get into, and start learning when to c-bet and why to c-bet some boards, and which hands that you need to have in order for a c-bet to be profitable as well. Okie dokie. I was going to say, I think King Jack here is a tight fold, probably a good fold. King 9 is a loose open, probably a good open. And Colossus makes a re-raise of the Ace 4 suited, which I have no problem with. It's a very good situation to re-raise. He has position. He has a good suited ace. It's like difficult for Chevy Slub to call him out of position here. Very good spot. Alright. Emershy comes in and calls the raise and a re-raise. This is very telling of a hand strength here. We're looking at probably like 10s or better, and ace queen or better, maybe even just 10s or better and ace king. Alright, so Colossus probably knows that he's pretty screwed. He's up shit creek. Colossus, though, flops the absolute nuts. And yippee-ki-yay, okay? That seat goes for a check. Colossus bets out less than half pot, and in all reality, given his stack sizes here, Colossus can just go half pot, and should be able to get it in by the river, right? If we have pot here, pot's to be 435. If you're not behind, we can bet 250 on the next street. Pot would be 6. I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess we can bet half pot here and have no problem with it. What that seat does is he goes for a check min raise, which again, don't do this, guys, especially with like pretty much anything. I mean, I don't really know what situation I would call for a check min raise here unless we had the nuts ourselves. We'll show you guys. I'm gonna go ahead and show you what he has at showdown because Colossus makes the call. That seat checks. Colossus makes the bet, goes all in. All right, and we'll know that like that seat ends up having pocket queens. There are many different bad things that happen post-flop here. Pre-flop calling pre-flop is just fine with the queens, okay? Error number 1 is the check min raise, alright? If we feel like we're ahead on this flop and we're going to be getting paid off by worse hands, then by all means, raise it up larger and get it all in, okay? If we're trying to get our opponent to fold, it makes no sense because we have pocket queens with queen of diamonds. Okie doke. Error number 2 is checking it again on the turn once we hit our like set. Alright? Yes, we have the queen of diamonds, but we're still very vulnerable. We do not want to give a free card to an ace diamonds or a king of diamonds, which is among the top number of hands he's going to have by bet calling the flop. Alright? Any kind of a draw that he has, he's going to have the ace high diamond or queen high diamond draw when he makes the call. So we do not want to check here and give him a free card. Alright, I know we have a set. I know we have a pretty big lock on the hand right now if we have queens. In fact, take Colossus' hand like out of the window here. If you've got pocket queens with the queen high flush draw on this turn, you should be willing to get it all in. Okie doke. Colossus makes a good bet size. He just needs to make the bet size here that he can get it all in on the next street, given what he has the nuts, and that seat then goes all in. We do not want to give a free card, which is why the going for the check raise on the turn is very bad. Because we're still very vulnerable. If we had like pocket aces with the ace of diamonds and we turn top set, and okay, we can actually go for a check raise there because we have absolute lock on the hand. But queens, even when we have top set, right, with the queen of diamonds, the board can't pair and give our opponent a 4 flush at the same time. So keep that in mind. And not flush holds. Alright, on to the next hand. Ace Jack, I'm assuming is going to be opening. That's just fine. And it's another hand with Colossus here. I think he gets in a little bit of fancy play syndrome. Oh, no, I know what this is. You see bet like a 6-5-5 board. And this is probably like the worst board to see bet. First off, like no pairs folding. Secondly, we probably have the nut no pair hand here unless he has ace queen or ace king. And our opponent has ace king. He's not folding ace king on this flop on a paired board. Like this doesn't happen. So the only hand that we really want to fold here is ace queen, and that's a big price to pay given the fact that we're folding out like all his garbage, and he's calling us with every single hand that beats us. So let's just check behind here, and we can call a turn bet off if we want to. We get check raised, and the funny thing is like this check raise is massive. Just so massive. I mean, and this is kind of the reason why we don't like to see bet on these boards, because it's very easy for our opponent to bluff. There's really not much we can do. If our opponent had check raises smaller, I would actually like to do a 3-bet here as a rebluff, just because it's just so hard for him to hit anything. But yeah, we have to fold it. The problem is though is the flop c-bet. Alright, this is actually a very interesting hand, and I could probably have to search my records to see what quiz it actually had here. But checking the flop was just fine with 9-8 suited, so was raising pre-flop. Nothing's really wrong so far. He can lead this turn all he wants. I think it's just a fine lead given the fact that we've got a gut shot and straight flush out to go with it. We're going to be hitting this turn like 1 in 3 or something like that, some ridiculous number. Or I'm sorry, on the river, so we can very easily bet it again. We're going to get a lot of like weaker hands to fold. We turn 2 pair of 9s, which is not a very good turn card for us. I mean, it's a very deceptive turn card. And I think Colossus was right into checking. But I have a question is, though, like, Quizit bets out here. What in the world could Quizit have in the situation that we're wanting, or rather, that he's value betting? Okay, he cold called preflop, called the turn, and then betting the river. Pocket tens is pretty much out of the question because he called the turn. Although I guess pocket tens has like a double gutter on the turn, so I guess there's a reason why he can call you. But I guess any 10 on the other hand can call you too because they have double gutter. But there's just so few 10 hands in Quizit's hand range. Given the price that we're getting of almost 3 to 1 here on the call with 2 pair, unlikely that Quizit has like ace queen or ace 8. He would have bet the flop. So I don't really know if Quizit's gonna be value betting a hand like queen jack here. But like Quizit's hand range was pretty narrow, although I don't really know what hands we beat. It'd almost be interesting to see just what in the world Quizit has. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go find Quizit's hand history right now and show you guys what he had, and we'll be right back. Alright, so I am back, and Quizit did in fact have queen jack here. So, I mean, you're right in thinking that like it's just so hard for our opponent to have anything. But I mean, at the same time, we're getting a really good price, and it's like the worst card in the deck, which is what's really gross. But yeah, I guess I don't mind the check fold, but I mean, I almost would just call here and wonder what in the world is going on, because I'd have a hard time putting like a 10 in his hand range. Very hard time putting a 10 in Quizit's hand range, and so it's just like, and he doesn't have ace or ace queen, so what in the world does he have? And it's like kind of confused. When I get confused, I kind of call, especially getting like a good price. Very thin value add by the queen jack, and I actually debate whether or not it's too thin because as you can see, like 9/8's folding. So there's really very few hands that will beat us, that will call us. Maybe we could bet even like smaller than this. You know what I mean, like 50 cents, something like that, just to make it really tiny. But I don't know, it's kind of close. Okie dokie, another re-raise hand, another hand with Colossus that I've talked about. I think Colossus probably normally folds his hand, and it should be a fold here. You guys should not be calling 9-10 suited against their like big blind re-raiser here. Yeah, we see that he has aces, but I mean, we're early position, and Live Life is re-raising us from out of position. So I mean, his hand range is going to be really tight, and he made it pretty large, so we're just not getting a very good price sell in order to make a call. If we were deeper here, maybe it's another story. Error by Live Life's part is by checking this flop. I think this is a classic board for us to value bet, although, I mean, I guess we're never bluffing this flop, or we don't really ever have any bluffs in our hand range when we bet this flop, but I mean, it's just so hard for us to do anything different. It's just kind of weird. So you get Colossus over here, decides to bet when check 2, and I mean, here's the problem. What is Live Life's range pre-flop for value that is then deciding to check fold this flop? I mean, you're looking like exactly like ace queen, but like why? I think ace queen would see by this board. So like any hand that Live Life has that checks this flop, he's going to be check calling it. So therefore, it makes it a very bad board for us to bet out. We actually be able to represent more hands by checking behind this card, behind this flop, and then betting the turn as it looks like we're going for thin value if our opponent does have a hand like that. But we get check raised off our hand. So calling the re-raise there pre-flop with the 9-10 suited. Hard to argue like bluffing post-flop to be bad, but in the situation, like it's very obvious that like when somebody checks like that after re-raising pre-flop, it's not usually a check fold. It's usually a check call, especially in somebody who doesn't have a lot of bluffs in their hand range. Chevy Slove opens Jack 10 offsuit. Colossus re-raises the jacks. I like it. I really do like it. I like re-raising it there. Miss Chevy Slove 4-bets to Jack 10 offsuit. Not my favorite hand to 4-bet with, but understandable. My biggest problem is Colossus deciding to call the 4-bet preflop in position with the jacks. If we feel like we're that far ahead, then why not just get it in preflop? All right, there's so much money in the middle right now. If our opponent was bluffing us, we have no problem folding it, given 38 big blinds. If you were to win 38 big blinds every time you guys hit pocket jacks, you guys would be rich. That's all I can say. All right, so we call here, which is not very good. The flop is relatively good for us, I guess. Chevy Sub bets out, and we go and we just fold. So I mean, what's the point of calling preflop if we're folding like post-flop every single time? In fact, as you guys can see, like SPR is such like 1.5 to 1, we can't really fold like anything post-flop. And are you putting a queen in like Chevy Slub's like 4-betting range, like ace queen or something like that? Like it doesn't make any sense. And if he was 4-betting an ace queen preflop, then you got to be jamming it in post-flop preflop with the jacks. So combination of like 1 calling the 4-bet and 2 calling the 4-bet only to fold to like this kind of a flop when like an ace or king doesn't hit. I mean, yeah, it's not a very good play at all in my opinion. So, okie doke. I believe we've reached the end of this video here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for participating in this tournament, and most of all, thanks for sending me your hands. Trevor and Phil, if you guys want to talk to me like in privately about how to send your hands in without sending them all one big mess, you guys can do that on your own time. But as always, I appreciate you guys sending me your hands in as well. Hopefully this has been entertaining as well as maybe provocative. Hopefully you guys have learned something. I know I have, and that Colossus is a little more spewy than I originally thought. Just kidding. And okay, so I'll let you guys go. This is CodeRed Rules, and I'll see you guys later.